Before we dive into today's powerful story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Like this video if you believe in standing up for yourself. And leave a comment below. Have you ever reached a breaking point in a relationship? We'd love to hear your story. Emily stood in the corner of the room, a glass of Pinot in hand, smiling politely at the chatter and laughter echoing through the spacious Chicago townhouse. Ryan's townhouse. Well, there's now, technically, but somehow it never quite felt like hers. The party was for one of Ryan's business associates, a man Emily barely knew, but she had become used to these kinds of evenings. Elegant, controlled, and meticulously curated. Much like Ryan himself. He liked things polished, predictable, beautiful on the outside. And Emily had fit that mold for a while. As she sipped her wine and nodded along to some surface-level conversation about real estate trends, her eyes drifted across the room to Ryan. He was talking with a tight group of friends near the bar. Men in tailored suits, all high-earning, all effortlessly confident. She could hear snippets of their banter through the music, enough to catch the cadence of Ryan's voice. Louder than usual, slightly smug. A tone he reserved for when he was trying to impress. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She didn't need to. One sentence floated to her ears like it had been meant just for her. She's not permanent, you know. She was just something that made sense at the time. After. Emily didn't blink. She didn't move. Her body went cold, but her face stayed frozen in a soft, practiced expression. The way Ryan would want her to look in public, poised. Her wine glass trembled slightly as she placed it down on a tray that passed by. The music seemed too loud now, the conversations too fake. She felt like a stranger in her own skin. She walked outside to the patio, air cooler now against her face, lungs tight but working. She couldn't tell if the tears threatening her eyes were from anger or humiliation. Maybe both. Maybe more. How long had she been temporary in his eyes? Had she ever been real to him? They'd been married for 3 years. She'd helped him through a lawsuit, helped build the image of stability he now used to close deals and land clients. She'd been his anchor, his clean slate after his messy breakup with Marissa. And now it turns out she was just a placeholder too. But Emily wasn't weak. She had been raised to keep her back straight and her mind clear. And in that moment, on that patio with the sounds of the party still laughing behind her, something clicked into place. She wouldn't cry in front of anyone. She wouldn't yell or beg. She would leave with the same dignity she brought into this marriage. But not silently. If she was temporary, then he'd feel what it was like to lose her permanently. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay in their bed. His side of the bed noticeably untouched, staring at the intricate patterns of the ceiling as the city lights filtered through the curtains. Her mind, once a soft and reliable place, was now a relentless machine, working through every interaction of the last 3 years with cold, forensic clarity. The next morning, Ryan acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed her cheek as he always did. His breath laced with the remnants of top-shelf bourbon and synthetic charm. "You were great last night," he said as he buttoned his crisp white shirt. "Thanks for being there." Emily smiled. Just enough to pass. She'd learned that trick a long time ago. How to smile in survival. She sat at the edge of the bed, robe cinched tightly, chin lifted, heart armored. "Of course," she said. "Always happy to support." But as the front door clicked behind him, Emily got to work. She didn't go nuclear. Not yet. That wasn't her way. She began by taking inventory. Not just of belongings but of her life. Of the decisions she'd made that had led her to this house, this marriage, this man. She pulled her wedding album out of storage. Not to cry but to look. Objectively. Page after page of perfect poses, white lace, his tailored tux, the champagne toast. Everyone said they looked like a power couple. She had believed them. But now the photos looked like a campaign, not a memory. She remembered how quickly Ryan had wanted everything. The engagement, the shared finances, the house. And how little he'd asked about what she wanted. She remembered, too, how often he'd spoken of her in vague compliments. She's solid, low maintenance, not dramatic, as if she were a practical car lease. Something useful until he wanted a flashier model. So she called a lawyer. His name was Daniel Brooks, a sharp but soft-spoken divorce attorney recommended by her friend Anna, who had gone through her own high-stakes split last year. "I don't want a war," Emily told him in their first meeting at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park. "I just want out with dignity." Daniel looked over her prenuptial agreement, then leaned back and gave a quiet nod. "It's airtight," he said. "He'll think he's protected. But you've been contributing in ways this prenup never considered. I'll help you build a case for emotional and strategic investment. How your support allowed him to grow, how your image was part of his professional gain." Emily felt a small, solid flame light in her chest. "And one more thing," she said. "I want to serve him publicly. Not for revenge but for clarity. I want the truth to meet him in the place where he lies the most, among his audience." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "I assume you have a venue in mind." Emily nodded slowly. "His birthday's next month. He's planning something big. He'll invite the people who matter to him most. Business partners, friends, clients." Daniel closed the folder. "Then we'll make sure you're holding the envelope." Over the next 4 weeks, Emily prepared quietly. She made no sudden changes to routine. She still made coffee in the mornings. She still went to charity events. She still let him believe she was comfortably orbiting his world. But in the background she was building a quiet case. Gathering emails that showed how often she coordinated his appearances, cleaned up his PR, soothed angry clients, even advised on which investments projected the right image. She pulled bank records, texts, voice messages. Daniel began crafting a case not of betrayal, but of strategic manipulation. How Ryan had used her not as a partner, but as a prop. Then came the party planning. Ryan insisted on a rooftop event overlooking the river. He wanted a jazz trio, signature cocktails, and a guest list that included both the glamorous and the influential. Emily nodded through it all, even helping him choose the wine list. "He'll think it's the best night of his year," she told Daniel days before the event. "Until I hand him the envelope." Daniel hesitated before asking, "Are you sure this is how you want to do it? Publicly?" Emily looked him square in the eye. "He told a room full of people I was temporary, that I was disposable. I want those same people to see me walk away, with calm, with power, and without apology." The night arrived. The rooftop was dressed in white lights and soft music. Waiters moved between clusters of wealthy men and women, laughter bubbling through the air like champagne. Ryan was in his element, shaking hands, giving speeches, making toasts. He wore the smile that had once made Emily fall in love, before she realized it wasn't his real face. It was a costume, one he wore for crowds, never for her. Emily, dressed in a sleek navy gown, stepped forward when the crowd raised their glasses. She walked toward Ryan with a calm expression. A few people turned to watch, thinking perhaps she'd join the toast. But instead, she placed a single sealed envelope in his hand. "Happy birthday, Ryan," she said softly, but loud enough for those around them to hear. "This is the last gift you'll receive from someone you didn't deserve." And before he could speak, before his confused smile could fully break, she turned around and walked away. Back straight, hair untouched by the wind, heels echoing softly as the crowd stood in stunned silence. Ryan didn't chase her. Not that night. In fact, Emily didn't hear a single word from him for 2 full days. She expected rage, confusion, a string of angry voicemails, but silence? That surprised her. And yet not really. He was too image-conscious to react publicly. He was waiting for the right moment to reclaim control of the narrative. And sure enough, on the 3rd day he struck. The first sign came through mutual friends, text messages that began with cautious curiosity. "Hey, just heard about the party. You okay? Emily, I didn't want to intrude, but Ryan's saying some stuff I think you should know." Then came the Instagram post. Ryan had uploaded a carousel of polished photos from the rooftop event. The caption read, "Life teaches us who's temporary and who's truly aligned with our journey. Growth means letting go, even when it's hard. Grateful for the real ones." Over 1,000 likes in 2 hours. Comments flooded in. "So sorry, man. Stay strong. Sometimes you outgrow people. Everything happens for a reason." Emily stared at the screen, her face lit by the glow of performative pity aimed at the wrong person. It was classic Ryan. Bend the narrative, never the truth. But she had her own quiet network. And they weren't buying it. Anna came over with wine and zero patience. "He's acting like he's the victim. After calling you temporary like you were a subscription service." Emily shrugged. "He doesn't know how to exist outside of a story where he's the hero." Anna leaned forward. "Well, maybe it's time the real story came out." Emily had thought about it. Going public. Posting her own side. But that wasn't her style. She didn't want a social media war. She didn't want to look like she was competing for sympathy. She wanted freedom. And peace. Not applause. Still it stung. To watch him spin her grief into his redemption arc. That night, she sat at her desk and began to write. Not a post, but a personal statement. For herself. For her lawyer. For clarity. She listed every time Ryan had minimized her. When she offered career advice and he laughed. "You're not in that world." When she redesigned his company's pitch deck and he took the credit. When she organized charity galas under his name and he told people it was his idea. When she gave up a job offer in Seattle so he wouldn't have to commute long distance. When he told her, "You're perfect for now. You calm the waters." Perfect for now. Temporary. Coming. Convenient. She had been his PR strategy, not his partner. By the end of the week, the gossip had reached full volume. Some mutual friends tried to stay neutral. Others took sides. Ryan's version gained traction among those who had never really known Emily beyond the polished surface. But a surprising number of people reached out with quiet admiration. "That was brave. I always wondered how you stayed so composed with him. You did the right thing." She appreciated it. But validation wasn't her goal. Emily started therapy. Not because she was broken, but because she didn't want to carry this pain into the next version of her life. She wanted to understand why she had ignored the red flags. Why she had been willing to disappear into someone else's vision of success. Her therapist, a quiet woman named Valerie, offered a theory during their second session. "You weren't just afraid of being alone," she said. "You were afraid of not being chosen. You equated being kept with being valued." Emily sat with that. Let it burn a little. Let it reshape something inside her. Because she realized it was true. She had once mistaken Ryan's approval for love. She had celebrated being picked, without questioning what she was being picked for. Meanwhile, Ryan escalated. He reached out through lawyers, pressuring her to sign a non-disclosure clause in exchange for a slightly larger settlement. Daniel, her attorney, brought it to her with a raised eyebrow. "He's nervous," he said. "Which means he's vulnerable. Which means you're winning." Emily didn't need the extra money. What she needed was her voice. So she declined. No gag order. He wanted a clean break. "Let's make it clean." Ryan didn't like that. He showed up at her apartment 2 days later. Uninvited. She opened the door to find him standing there in an expensive coat, holding a box of her things from the house. He looked tired but still composed. Always composed. "I thought you might want these," he said. She didn't answer right away. Just stared at him. Ryan exhaled. "Look, I get it. You were upset. You made a statement. You proved your point. But this, all of this, it's unnecessary now." Emily crossed her arms. "Unnecessary." He nodded. "The public performance. The silence. The lawyers. You could have just talked to me. We could have worked through this. Privately." She let out a quiet laugh. "Privately. Like when you told your friends I was temporary." His eyes narrowed but just slightly. Still trying to maintain his footing. "That was a joke. An offhand comment. taken out of context. Emily's tone sharpened. It was the only honest thing you said all year. They stood there, the cold between them thicker than the winter wind outside. Ryan shifted. You think you're making some kind of power move, but you're just burning bridges. You're going to regret this. She shook her head. No. I regret staying as long as I did. She took the box from his hands, stepped back, and closed the door without another word. Back inside, she set the box down and exhaled deeply. Not from relief, not from fear, just release. A slow uncoiling of everything she'd held in. She was done performing. From this point forward, her life would be built in her own voice, her own pace, and on her own terms. Emily sat at a small cafe near the lake, the kind of place where no one asked questions and the coffee came strong and quick. She watched the fog roll over the water, her phone face down on the table. There was freedom in silence. No calls, no texts, no updates from people who only now remembered she existed. But there was also a question lingering in her chest. Who am I without him? She hadn't asked it before, not really. Because for so long, her identity was stitched into his wife, his support, his background. Now she was just Emily. And that terrified her more than divorce papers ever could. So she started small. She deleted the couple photos from social media. Not in a dramatic wipe, but in quiet increments. She unsubscribed from newsletters that reminded her of his world. She began journaling again. Just thoughts, fragments, messy honesty. And one morning, she applied for a fellowship she had once declined to stay in Ryan's orbit, a non-profit focused on women's leadership and storytelling. She didn't know what would come of it. But pressing submit felt like something breaking open inside her. Not rage, not grief, just space. The first time Emily saw herself again, it was in a dressing room mirror. Not in a metaphorical way. Literally. She had walked into a small boutique on Armitage Avenue, half out of boredom, half because her therapist had asked her to do one thing a week that had no purpose beyond joy. She wasn't looking for anything. But a silk blouse in a soft burnt orange caught her eye. Something she'd never have worn before. Too bold. Who? Not Ryan. She tried it on without much thought. And then she looked up. The woman staring back at her was different. Not entirely, but noticeably. Her posture had shifted. Her eyes were sharper. Her jaw less tense. And there was something else. A steadiness that hadn't been there for a long time. Emily blinked. Not because she didn't recognize herself, but because she finally did. That moment stayed with her through the weekend, long after she'd bought the blouse and folded it into her drawer like a secret. She didn't wear it yet. It wasn't for anyone else. Just for her. Back home, she began sorting through the rest of her closet. Not in a performative way. No new me speech, no impulsive purge. Just small decisions. The dresses Ryan loved but she didn't. The heels she wore to events where she wasn't allowed to speak. The jewelry he bought for apology, not affection. One by one she let them go. By Sunday her room felt lighter. Not emptier. Just less occupied by ghosts. Monday came with an unexpected email. The fellowship had shortlisted her for interviews. Emily stared at the message, rereading it like a surprise invitation to a party she forgot she RSVP'd to. Her first instinct was doubt. Was she really qualified? Was she relevant? Had she been out of her own skin too long to re-enter the world she left behind for marriage? But then she thought of the pitch decks. The strategy meetings. The charity plans she'd orchestrated under Ryan's name. The mentorship calls she took late at night to coach his junior partners. She wasn't just qualified. She had been overqualified, just hidden behind someone else's ego. She hit reply, and confirmed her availability for Friday. Then she called Anna. "You better not talk yourself out of this," Anna said immediately. "You were building other people's dreams. Now build yours." Emily smiled. "I'm not sure what my dream even looks like anymore." "Then start with what it doesn't look like," Anna said. "Because that part, you already burned down. And thank God." The next few days were a quiet storm of reflection and preparation. Emily dusted off her old notebooks, read through past ideas she had shelved. She practiced her pitch in front of the mirror, wearing that orange blouse. She remembered the sound of her own ambition. And for the first time in years, she wasn't worried about how she sounded to anyone else. The morning of the interview, she walked into the non-profit's office with her head high. No jewelry, no designer bag, just a pressed suit, clean nails, and a folder with her proposal. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't rehearsing. She was ready. The panel of directors asked thoughtful questions, and she gave real answers. She didn't over-polish her story. She spoke about burnout, about fading into someone else's success, about rediscovering the voice she forgot she had. Halfway through, one of the women on the panel nodded slowly and said, "You sound like someone who's been through something important and didn't let it shrink you." Emily didn't flinch. "I almost did," she said. "But then I realized I wasn't angry at the fall. I was angry at how long I kept pretending I wasn't falling." They nodded. When she left the room, she didn't wait for feedback. She already knew. She had shown up for herself. That was the win, regardless of what followed. That night she made herself dinner. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She played jazz records. Not the kind Ryan approved of, but the ones with grit and soul. She lit a candle. He opened a book. And she didn't think about him. Not once. 2 weeks passed. Emily didn't get the fellowship, at least not yet. The organization said they were finalizing their decisions. And she was a strong finalist. The waiting didn't bother her as much as she expected. Something had shifted. She was no longer hinging her worth on acceptance. She had already accepted herself. Then, on a Thursday morning that began like any other, her phone buzzed with a name she hadn't seen in a while. Jordan Lawrence. A former colleague. Well, technically Ryan's colleague, but one who always treated Emily like more than a plus one. He was one of the few people in Ryan's orbit who saw through the surface shine. And he never bought into the myth of the perfect power couple. She hesitated before answering. "Jordan." "Hey, Emily," he said. "I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to reach out about something professional." Her shoulders relaxed a little. "Go on." "We're launching a new initiative focused on community-based funding strategies. I remember you used to talk about that non-profit pitch you worked on before, things changed." Emily blinked. She hadn't thought anyone remembered. "I've followed some of your writing online. Quiet but powerful. You've got a good voice. And we need someone who can ground the messaging with real emotional intelligence." She leaned back in her chair. "Jordan, are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a seat at the table," he said. "What you do with it is up to you." Emily didn't commit right away. She wasn't the kind of person who leapt before thinking anymore. But she took the call seriously. She researched the team. She read the proposal. And more than anything, she sat with the question. Was she ready to step back into a world that once overlooked her? The difference now was that she wouldn't let herself be invisible. If she went back, it would be on her own terms, with her name on the work, her name on the credits, and her name spoken with respect. So she said yes. And for the first time in years, her calendar began filling with meetings that excited her. Deadlines that didn't drain her. Conversations that didn't leave her questioning her own voice. But with the rising came echoes. One afternoon, as she left a planning session downtown, she passed by the restaurant where Ryan had first introduced her to his mentor, the same man who once said, "You're a great wife, Emily. Supportive. Uncomplicated." She had smiled then, not realizing it was a subtle way of saying forgettable. She didn't go inside. Just stood across the street and watched the people coming and going. The world that had once been hers, only not really. Not deeply. Back home, she opened an old photo album, one she hadn't touched in months. Page after page of curated smiles, professional backdrops, black tie events. She didn't rip the pages or burn the book. Instead, she added sticky notes on the edges with little truths. "I was exhausted this night. He didn't thank me for this. I cried in the car after this event. She wasn't erasing the past. She was finally labeling it accurately. Then, as if summoned by her reflection, Ryan called. No voicemail. Just a missed call. She stared at the notification for a full minute before deleting it. A week later he tried again, this time with a text. Just wanted to talk. I've been thinking about everything. Hope you're okay. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just his familiar instinct to re-enter a space once he sensed it no longer revolved around him. Emily didn't respond. But it rattled her more than she wanted to admit. The next morning, she brought it up to her therapist. He always reaches out when he feels like he's losing narrative control, she said. It's not about me. It's about him still being the center. Valerie nodded. And how do you want to handle that? I want to protect what I've rebuilt, Emily said. I want him to stay out of this new chapter. But I also don't want to pretend it doesn't affect me. Then feel it, Valerie said gently. Feel it fully. And still don't answer. So she didn't. Not the next text. Not the one after that. And not the email he eventually sent through his assistant, asking for a civil conversation over coffee. She wasn't angry. She was done. And being done was a peace she didn't know she was allowed to feel. One night, while working late, she paused over a slide in her pitch deck and realized something. She didn't need to reclaim the life she lost. She was already living the life she almost never gave herself permission to imagine. And it was hers. Emily woke up that morning with an unfamiliar sense of clarity. The weight of Ryan's shadow, though still present, felt thinner, as if her own light was beginning to outshine it. She made coffee in her small kitchen, sunlight filtering through the blinds. The city was waking up outside, but inside, something quiet was settling. At work, Emily was no longer a background note on someone else's agenda. She was the architect of ideas, the strategist with a clear voice. Her new role was challenging but invigorating, far from the stifling routine she'd endured for years. Her team looked to her for direction, and she embraced it without hesitation. But the real transformation was not just professional. One evening, Anna invited her to a gallery opening. It was a modest event. Local artists, wine glasses, the murmur of conversations punctuated by bursts of laughter. Emily hesitated but accepted. It was outside her usual comfort zone, but she felt ready. At the gallery, she wandered through paintings that explored identity, loss, and rebirth. She stopped in front of one, a chaotic swirl of colors clashing and blending, fighting and harmonizing. Anna approached her. "Reminds me of your story," she said softly. Emily smiled. "Maybe. I'm still figuring out the picture." They talked about resilience, about how sometimes the messiest canvases became the most compelling. Later they moved outside, where the cool night air carried the hum of the city. Emily found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. About Ryan, about the divorce, about her fears and hopes. Anna listened without judgment, offering support that was steady, not performative. That night, walking home alone, Emily realized she was no longer afraid of solitude. She was learning how to hold space for herself, whole, imperfect, and undeniably real. And for the first time in a long time, she looked forward to what came next. There was a room in Emily's apartment she had left mostly untouched since the divorce. It wasn't big, just a small spare bedroom meant to be an office, maybe a guest room someday. For months, she closed the door like it held something too fragile to confront. But on a quiet Saturday morning, she opened it. Dust danced in streaks of sunlight. Boxes still sat in corners, some marked Ryan's in rushed black Sharpie. She stared at them, realizing she hadn't thrown them out, not out of sentiment but out of inertia, maybe even avoidance. It was time. She began pulling the boxes out one by one. His books, his cufflinks, business cards, a travel journal he once started but never finished. She didn't cry. Instead, she sorted them neatly into a donation pile, a recycle bin, and a small box for return, though she wasn't sure if she'd ever send it. At the bottom of one box, she found a photo. It was from their 3rd anniversary, taken in Aspen. He was smiling wide, she was leaning into him. But even in that captured moment, Emily could see the tension in her own shoulders, the way her eyes seemed to scan for approval. She tore it in half, not out of bitterness, but as an act of truth. Then she exhaled. By noon the room was empty. But Emily didn't stop there. She went to the hardware store, picked up a can of warm terracotta paint, and spent the afternoon transforming the walls. Each stroke felt like a reclamation, a choice she made without anyone else's opinion hovering. By evening she had a vision, a writing room, a space for her projects, her voice, her next chapter. She ordered a desk online, bookmarked an armchair, and smiled when she realized she didn't need anyone's permission to do this. In the weeks that followed, the room took shape. She framed a few of her favorite quotes, not the Pinterest kind but the gritty, real ones. "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." No is a complete sentence. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. She placed her journals on a shelf, filled a corkboard with notes, ideas, scraps of dreams that hadn't been spoken aloud yet. The room had no trace of Ryan. It wasn't an erasure. It was a declaration. One afternoon, Emily invited Anna over to see it. Anna stepped inside, spun slowly in the center. "Wow," she said. "This room feels like you finally took your voice off mute." Emily nodded. "It's the first place I've ever created just for me." "No apologies," Anna said. "None," Emily replied. Later that evening, as twilight settled outside, Emily sat at her new desk and opened a fresh document. She didn't have a full story yet, just fragments. But she began to write. About a woman who rebuilt herself piece by piece. About the fire that came with being silenced too long. About hope that didn't come wrapped in romance, but in rediscovered strength. She didn't care if anyone read it. She was writing it because it needed to be written. And in that quiet room, surrounded by her own choices, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not because someone else promised to protect her, but because she had learned how to protect herself. Fall arrived suddenly. The kind of cold that crept into your sleeves and made you breathe deeper. Emily had always loved October. There was something honest about it. No more pretending it was summer. The leaves let go without asking permission. She was learning to do the same. Work had become more than a job. It was now a space of restoration. Her team respected her not because she spoke the loudest, but because when she spoke, she meant it. Her presence, once dismissed in Ryan's world, now carried weight. But she never confused professional validation with personal closure. And Ryan still lingered in the background like a song she no longer played but occasionally heard in passing. One night, after a strategy dinner with colleagues, Emily stepped into a bookstore to wind down. She found herself drawn to the memoir section. One spine caught her attention. What We Leave Behind. It was about women who walked away from marriages that no longer reflected them. Some had children, some didn't. Some left quietly, others through fire. But all of them had one thing in common. They left before they were completely erased. Emily bought the book and read it in 2 sittings. There was a passage she underlined 3 times. Sometimes the apology you need most is the one they'll never have the courage to give. Heal anyway. That line stayed with her the next day when Ryan showed up. Unannounced. He didn't call or text this time. He simply appeared outside her building like it was still 2019. Like they still shared a rhythm that she hadn't long since outgrown. Emily was returning from the market when she saw him. He looked thinner, more tired, but still polished, still Ryan. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch. "Emily," he said, voice low, like he wasn't sure what volume he was allowed to use around her anymore. She didn't smile. Didn't invite him in. "I'd like to talk," he said. "If you're open." She considered it. Not for him but for herself. After a long pause she nodded. 10 minutes. They sat on a bench by the corner cafe. No coffee. No small talk. Ryan cleared his throat. "I've been doing some work. On myself." She nodded once. "I know I failed you," he said. I minimized you. I made you feel like a placeholder. You said I was temporary, Emily replied calmly. To your friends. To people I welcomed into our home. He looked down. I was trying to look strong. Like I wasn't dependent. She almost laughed. But you were. Just not on me. On the illusion of control. Ryan swallowed hard. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I see it now. What I did. What I cost us. Emily stared at him for a long time. You don't owe me an apology, she said. But you owe yourself an honest life. Are you finally living one? He blinked, caught off guard. I'm trying. She stood up. Then try harder. But don't come here to feel better about yourself. I don't exist for your redemption. She walked away. Not with anger. Not with regret. Just relief. She didn't need to scream or cry. The moment didn't need to be dramatic to matter. She didn't even tell Anna about it until 2 days later. And when she did, she said, I'm glad he said it. But I didn't need to hear it. Anna smiled. That's how you know you've healed. That night, Emily lit a candle in her writing room. She picked up her pen and wrote a line. I loved him until I remembered how to love myself more. She didn't stop writing for hours. November came with sharp winds and long gold-colored evenings. The days felt quieter, less reactive. Emily wasn't waiting for anything anymore. She was just living. And that, she realized, was the biggest change. Her writing room had become a sanctuary. Not just for work but for her. For rediscovering the parts of herself she once silenced to keep peace in a relationship that mistook her softness for weakness. She was working on a long-form essay, something personal, about the way women shrink themselves without realizing, how certain kinds of men feed on that shrinking, and how healing often looks like becoming too much again. One night, while drafting the final paragraph, an email popped into her inbox with a subject line. Your essay submission accepted for feature. She blinked twice. Reread it. It was from an editor at a national publication. One she'd respected for years but never had the nerve to pitch until Anna dared her to submit something anonymously. She laughed out loud. Then cried a little. She texted Anna. Then called her mom. Then sat in silence and let herself feel every piece of it. Not just pride. Not just excitement. But arrival. She was no longer proving anything. Not to Ryan. Not to the past. Not even to herself. She was simply here. Oh. 2 weeks later her piece went live. The title was raw and unapologetic. I wasn't temporary. I was just tired of being ignored. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages. Stories from strangers. Women, men, even couples who saw themselves in her words. She never mentioned Ryan by name, but he didn't need to be named. The truth had its own way of echoing. A few days later, Emily received a handwritten letter. From a woman named Clara in Ohio. I left a 10-year marriage because of your story. I'd been waiting for a sign. Turns out it was your voice. Emily placed the letter in a wooden box on her desk labeled Keep Me Brave. Then she wrote a reply. Not for publication. Just for Clara. At work, her boss asked her to lead a new initiative aimed at storytelling in marginalized communities. Your voice changes people, he said simply. We want more of that. More of you. And just when it seemed like everything was settling, something unexpected happened. Emily received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership summit in San Diego. She stared at it for a while, unsure. I'm not a speaker, she told Anna over the phone. You weren't a writer either, Anna replied. Until you were. So she said yes. She stood on stage weeks later, nervous at first. But the moment she spoke, something clicked. She wasn't reading words. She was telling truth. From her gut. When she finished, the room stood in silence before the applause started. Not thunderous. Not dramatic. But real. A woman from the front row came up afterward and said, I thought I was the only one who felt invisible inside my own life. Emily took her hand and said, You're not. You never were. That night, alone in her hotel room, she looked out at the ocean. She didn't think about Ryan, or the party, or the betrayal. She thought about how far she'd walked since that moment. From wife, to stranger, to survivor, to storyteller, to herself. And in that moment, she whispered softly into the quiet, "I'm proud of you." Because finally, after everything, she meant it. Winter in the city was quiet, subtle. It didn't shout like summer. It whispered, pressed its cold hands against windows, and made people draw closer to what truly warmed them. Emily had never liked the cold. But this year it felt different. Her apartment was filled with small rituals now. Saturday mornings meant fresh bread from the bakery around the corner. Sundays were for books, soft jazz, and long, slow afternoons. There were no more apologies for resting. No guilt for joy. No waiting for someone else to approve her pace. She lived alone but not lonely. She was surrounded by connection. Genuine, nourishing relationships. Friends who checked in. Colleagues who celebrated her. Readers who sent her words that felt like small lifelines. And Anna, who had become something more than a friend. Something steady, solid, like chosen family. On New Year's Eve, Emily hosted a gathering. Nothing extravagant. Just a few friends, candles, music, and an open-door kind of energy. There was laughter in the air. Someone spilled champagne. Someone cried while sharing a poem. Everyone belonged. As midnight approached, they gathered on the rooftop. The city glittered below. Fireworks bloomed in the distance. The countdown echoed from every balcony and screen. 10, 9, 8. Emily closed her eyes. 7, 6, 5. She thought about the version of herself from a year ago. Quiet. Waiting to be seen. 4, 3. She thought about the party where everything broke. 2. And the morning after, when she chose herself. 1. Ears. Glasses clinked. Someone kissed someone else. Someone shouted 2026. Too early. Emily opened her eyes and smiled. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the apartment smelled like pine and leftover laughter, Emily stood at the window and watched the city breathe. She didn't make a resolution. She didn't need one. But she made a promise. To never close the door on herself again. In the weeks that followed, her life expanded. She was invited to collaborate on a book. Collection of essays from women who rebuilt themselves. She didn't hesitate this time. She went on a retreat upstate with Anna and a group of writers, where they sat by fires and wrote until their hands ached and their hearts cracked open. She got a tattoo on her ribs. Just 3 words. Still becoming her. One afternoon, Emily received a package with no note. Inside was a copy of the Aspen photo, the same one she had torn, but this one was printed anew. No message. Just the image, reprinted like someone trying to rewrite history. She didn't need to ask who sent it. She walked it straight to the trash. Because she had no interest in restoring a version of her that no longer existed. Instead, she turned her attention to a blank page. There was a new story to begin. And this time, no one else would be holding the pen. Spring arrived gently. Not with sudden heat or dramatic blooms, but with small, persistent signs. Birdsong in the mornings, sunlight stretching a little longer each day, the scent of rain on pavement. Emily felt it in her bones before she saw it. Not just the season changing. Herself. The book came out in April. Letters to the Woman I Left Behind. Emily's essay opened the collection. She hadn't reread it in months, but when she held the printed copy in her hands, she smiled. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. The book launched quietly. No bestseller lists, no press tours. Just words passed between readers. Like whispered truths. Anna surprised her with a gathering at her apartment the night of the release. There were paper lanterns strung across the ceiling, stacks of the book on the table, and a cake that said in gold icing, "You were never temporary." Emily laughed, then cried when she saw it. Not from sadness. From finally being witnessed. A few weeks later, she gave a talk at a women's center in Brooklyn. The room was filled with stories like hers. Different faces, different names, but the same ache of being too much for the wrong person and not enough for the right ones. When she finished, a woman approached her. Late 30s, sharp eyes, soft voice. "Your story isn't mine," she said. "But it made me feel like maybe I'm allowed to tell my own." Emily nodded. "You don't need permission. Just a beginning." That night, walking home under a light rain, Emily realized something. She no longer thought about Ryan. Not with pain. Not with nostalgia. She just didn't think of him at all. His story had ended chapters ago. And she had stopped rereading it. The next morning, she stood in the doorway of her writing room, the one she'd painted terracotta almost a year ago. Light poured in. The corkboard was full now. The desk messy in the best way. The chair worn from use. It wasn't a room anymore. It was a life. She sat, opened her journal and wrote. "One day, you'll wake up and realize you are the woman you used to wait for. She's not perfect. She's not finished. But she's here. And she's not leaving." Emily closed the journal, got up, and opened the window wide. The breeze moved through the room like an old friend. And she smiled. Not because she had everything figured out, but because she finally knew. She belonged to herself now. And that would always be enough. Then,